Thank you so much, Courtney. Thanks for putting on this great event and inviting me up. And I got to drive 10 rescued bunnies that were rescued from a research lab on the way up here, and they're now at a sanctuary at Out to Pasture out in Estacada. So my name is Matt Rossell. I now work for Rescue and Freedom Project, formerly Beagle Freedom Project. We work against all cage cruelty and try to rescue animals around the world. A major focus of ours, though, is animals in research, and we've rescued more than 1,000 animals from research labs, hundreds of beagles from research labs, and we work on legislation to protect them and to end it. Our signature legislation is the Beagle Freedom Bill, which has passed in 7 states now. The Maryland governor just signed it on Tuesday to make number 7. And this bill it mandates dogs and cats that are healthy after the research is over get placed and adopted out into loving homes. Is it up there? It should be under my name. I don't see it. You might get spared the photos, which might be okay too. The topic is Undercover Investigations, and I did work undercover for many years. The first experience I had was in Omaha, Nebraska, Boystown Hospital. I was a security guard there, and I heard the plaintive cries of kittens on the other side of a locked laboratory door. And I went in, I had the keys, I went to check on what was going on and found the victims of Ed Walsh, this researcher who was conducting invasive brain experiments, purporting to study deafness in children and just brutally injuring these kittens. The lucky ones never survived the surgery. The unlucky survivors were in pain, not getting pain meds, crying out for their mothers. He cut nerves he wasn't supposed to, and they were having trouble nursing and walking. And I didn't know anything about this really. I reached out to the only organization I knew of at the time was PETA, and they instructed me to try to get some photographs and video of this. And one thing led to another. It turned into a campaign, and eventually all the cat experiments were shut down at Boystown Hospital. And the deaf community came out strongly in opposition to these experiments because they didn't want these kittens to be massacred in their name, and it wasn't helping anyone. And so then I started working for PETA as an investigator, and I went on to work in a lot of different places. I spent 4 months on a fur farm where I was working during the pelting season of an Illinois fox farm and helped this man, Dan Ashelman, anally electrocute 500 foxes. But I was able to document that, and we took the videos to the state ag department, and he was eventually busted on some animal cruelty charges. The things you might think of, like the brutal death of an animal on a fur farm, is not even against the law, and so that wasn't what he got busted for. But there were some really horrific situations. One fox, which I'm currently sparing you a picture of looking at her right now, she had her paw caught in the back of the cage and had to chew her own leg off to get to the food in the front of the cage. That is the level of neglect that's happening in these places. They're paying so little attention. It's such an assembly line that they didn't even notice that this poor animal was caught in her own cage and couldn't eat. And he didn't even, when I pointed that out to the fur farmer and said, hey, maybe this fox needs to be euthanized, he was like, oh, her coat's fine. And I mean, we're talking about the bone sticking out, the whole arm was severed, no veterinary attention, there's nothing that happened. So those are the kind of things, that's the level of cruelty that it takes to get someone like this in trouble. And it was mainly just a slap on the wrist, but he was very much embarrassed in his community to be reading headlines about getting brought up on animal cruelty charges. I've been inside of various factory farms. It's horrible what's happening to animals in that are used for food production. It's unbelievably horrible. I spent one day in a slaughterhouse in South Omaha, and oh, there it is. No, that's fine. It's fine. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about my time at the circus, because that was my first experience with elephants. How do I move it through the slides? Okay, so here's some cats from the Boystown Experiment. I'll just briefly show you. There's the fox I was just telling you about. I also, after working for PETA, I spent 2 years undercover at Oregon Health Sciences University, Oregon National Primate Research Center, where thousands of monkeys are getting experimented on. This is a typical cage, 1 monkey per cage in these cages. And as you would imagine, these non-human primates are just like us in their need for socialization, for companionship. You put them alone in a cage, it's torture. Even before the first experiment happens, they're already suffering from so many things that these animals never would experience in the wild, where they would be in these matrilinear troops of like 50 or more monkeys living in family with complex relationships and busy, complicated lives. And here they're stuck, they're bored, and they're suffering. And this is one little baby isolated alone in a cage. I was able in 2 years to get a lot of video out of the lab, and I've eventually quit in frustration. The USDA inspector at the time, who I had been making anonymous complaints to, also quit because she was trying to do her job and was not being supported. When she wouldn't take my word for it. I would tell her what was going on and the routine violations of law, the mistakes in research, the ridiculous experiments, and she would go in and see for herself. And when she would write up her inspection reports, her supervisors at the USDA were telling her that she was being too hard on the institution, that she needed to cut her list of violations in half and cut that list of violations in half again. And she eventually felt like she wasn't able to uphold the law, and she quit. And we went and had a press release sitting side by side explaining how the system is not set up to protect these animals. It's set up to protect the financial interests of the research laboratories. But I did work for a month on Walker Brothers Circus, and this is where I met Loda and Liz. And this is not my photograph, and I really didn't get any video or photos from my time at the circus, because of all of my undercover work, this was the time when I really felt like my life was at risk. I mean, these circus people are scary people. The people that are abusing the elephants in the circus, the guy that trained the elephant at Walker Brothers, Johnny Walker, Little John, or the son of the late John Walker, was an abusive man, had a horrible temper. Everyone at the circus was afraid of him. On the first day, I packed up all my camera equipment and stuff. As soon as I saw what was happening and how scary this place was, I sent anything that had to do with my investigation, I mailed away, because my role there was Loda and Liz, 2 elephants from the Hawthorne Corporation, were the last 2 elephants that were still out on the road. The whole herd had come down with TB. Most of them had been pulled back. And Loda and Liz, Walker Brothers, refused to take them off the road. And my job was simply to alert the authorities the next day where we were going to be in what town, because they keep their schedules secretive. And we were trying to get Wildlife Agency or some authority to come in and seize these animals, because Loda was very physically, apparently sick. You could tell she was losing weight. She was sleeping at all hours of the day. She was just really run down and tired, especially Loda. And so I was a tent worker. My day consisted of waking up really early in the morning, 6 a.m. or before, depending on how far away the next town is. We would drive to the next town, start pitching the tent. That would take most of the morning, if not into the afternoon. Then we'd have a couple hours off. I worked both the shows, would do 2 circuses a day. I worked the elephant rides and I did props at the show because I was trying to get as close to the elephants as I could. And then at night, after the 2 shows, we would take the tent down, which would take until 11 p.m., sometimes midnight. And all of this 7 days a week, no days off, every day a new town. I was making $150 a week, which this is a while back, but I mean, the employees at these circuses are also suffering too in a lot of cases. I mean, obviously not like the animals. Obviously, the people have a choice, and the animals have no choices. But it's a really brutal life on the circus for everyone, and it's a very strange life, and it's very insular. These are traveling like gypsies almost. People are born into the circus. Literally, it's like not something that most people like seek out. Not many people run off and join the circus, like the saying goes. You're usually born into it, and unfortunately, the traditions of the brutal training of these animals is also a part of that. And I will never forget, late at night, hearing John Walker with his bullhook whacking Liz so hard, and it would echo through the fairgrounds, and her crying out. And finally, the elephants were stopped at the Florida border. They were sent back to the rest of the herd, and because of the work of Delcy and others and everyone who came together to protect these elephants, the Hawthorne elephants, the USDA did prosecute eventually, and Loda and Liz, and I do have a picture that's not mine. Here's Loda. They were sent to the elephant sanctuary in Tennessee. Unfortunately for Loda, she didn't have much time there. She was sick when she arrived. But Liz lived almost a decade there and has now passed peacefully in 2015. But that's definitely a happy ending story. And I went on after doing undercover work to work here in Portland. This is me and Courtney at a circus protest. I was working for In Defense of Animals at the time. And we did, as Courtney said, work on some stuff at the zoo together, trying to get the bond measure to be meaningful for the elephants. Their plan was to spend 2/3 of the money on making their little enclosure a tiny bit bigger, with this promise that wasn't really a promise of this off-site preserve that they never would really agree to commit to. So we couldn't support the bond measure, but we worked hard to try to publicize it. I most recently, before Rescue and Freedom Project, was working for Animal Defenders International. And this is the launch of the Traveling Exotic Animal Protection Act in Congress, a bill that's still active to ban the wild animal performances in traveling circuses and shows. And every good piece of legislation and every good campaign starts with undercover work. And so Animal Defenders International did an undercover investigation of this company, Have Trunk Will Travel. This is, they have a herd of 5 elephants. They were in Southern California for many, many years doing movies. Their elephants, Ty and Becky, Kitty, Dixie, were in movies. They were used for elephant rides. Anywhere they could get some business. They had contracts with a lot of the state fair or the county fairs around Southern California. They would do weddings and parties or whatever they could do. So this evidence was crucial, and a lot of the many groups and campaigners worked very hard to spread this evidence around and get these elephant rides shut down. All their major contracts, one after the other, from county to county, we would just go present evidence. All the experts would come in, and we would get these contracts shut down and ended elephant rides one after the other over the course of several years, to the point where when the bullhook ban in California finally passed, which was the end of Have Trunk Will Travel in California, much of their work and all their big elephant ride gigs had already been shut down. And you know, the success of legislation can lead to major rescues. And ADI passed a lot of legislation all throughout South America. This was in Peru, in Lima, Peru, at the airport. 33 lions are loaded up and getting ready for flight to South Africa, to sanctuary. And here's a picture of them in they're in enclosures, but in natural habitat, and living as close to a wildlife as a captive lion could ever live. And you're never too young or too old to speak up for animals. This is my daughter Felix speaking at LA City Council. We've had a lot of success at the local level. She just spoke this last Wednesday at LA City Council for a cruelty-free Los Angeles ordinance, which hopefully, if we can get it through, is going to get rid of all animal-tested cleaners and products and soaps throughout all of the Los Angeles city offices. But she's a little activist, and the kids do a great job. This was our victory. Look at all those people that helped make this happen in New York City. Many groups and individuals came together to ban exotic animal performances in New York City. We're very close in Los Angeles to a similar one. And this is a very funny looking elephant. There's been so many at the local, and we're working on it at the state level. There has been so many victories of wild animal bans for performing animals. And the reason why I chose this picture with a tiger is that a lot of times the elephants clearly are the most identifiable, the most beloved, most iconic species, I think, arguably, on the planet. But when we're working on legislation, I think it's really important for people to consider how broad can this legislation be. You know, if it's possible to extend beyond just elephants and not just have a species-specific ordinance, but to include the others. Sometimes it's the elephants that help these guys get through the door. And they're all suffering in the same way. All these exotic animals, when they're in these captive environments, are suffering just as badly. And just to wrap up, let me check my time. You know, on some level, we can all work together on doing investigations, and I think a lot of people do. I mean, a lot of the grassroots work that happens are people that are going to the zoo, and you don't necessarily have to be behind the scenes to get evidence. A lot of times you can just go be a patron at the zoo and talk to zookeepers, and now, you know, video cameras are ubiquitous. Everyone's got a video camera on their cell phone, and everyone's so familiar with and used to people shooting video. We should all be documenting the abuse of the animals everywhere where you're at. And I think that it's really important also to, you know, it's a good idea to reach out to professional organizations that have a lot of experience in this, who have contact with experts, with veterinarians, with attorneys, because we have to be very careful how we present the information. I mean, one of the things I learned early on in investigations is that we have so much stacked against us, being, you know, considered extremists, and it's kind of built in that if you're an animal activist, you know, you're exaggerating or you're not going to be truthful. And the reality for these animals is bad enough. There's absolutely no reason to exaggerate any of this. It's horrific what's happening to them. And so we have to be very careful in our documentation to just stick with the facts. And if you aren't an elephant expert and you see something that looks bad on an elephant or a photograph, before you post that online, you know, get it double checked. Find someone who has access to a wildlife veterinarian who can, you know, watch the video of the elephant walking, who can, you know, determine what's really going on, and try to get some expertise to back you up, because I think that sometimes we can flood Facebook and flood the internet with things that aren't as accurate as they could be, and it sometimes hurts our cause more than it helps. So on that note, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I just want to thank all of you guys for all the work you're doing. It takes all of us together to help these animals and to raise awareness about the plight of elephants, so thank you.